Hello everyone, welcome back to another Genshin Impact video. Lantern Rite is right around the corner, meaning that two of the most popular characters, Ganyu and Zhongli, are almost up for grabs. And while this is exciting news in and of itself, it also means that players, especially free-to-play players, are going to have to make a difficult decision. If you can't get both, are you going to go for the Coco Goat Ganyu, or are you going to go for the Geodaddy himself, Zhongli? Both of these characters are major account boosters, but if you could only choose one, which one would give you more value overall? While we have reviewed both of these characters separately, today we're going to be taking a look at them side by side. This way we can directly compare their gameplay and their strengths and weaknesses so that you can hopefully make the best decision for your account. If you do end up finding the video helpful at all, please feel free to leave me a like and comment down below. It does help me boost into the YouTube algorithm and I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you want to see more Genshin Impact videos from me, make sure to hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell. We're getting close to 25,000 subscribers and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Okay, but with all that out of the way, let's get into the video. It goes without saying that Ganyu and Zhongli are both two of the most popular characters in Genshin Impact. Both offer players tremendous value both on and off field. However, these characters have wildly different playstyles and fill completely different roles on a team. So let's quickly break down their strengths and weaknesses so you can get a better understanding of whether they'll be a good fit for you. And then after that, we'll directly compare the value that they bring to the table, depending on what you personally need for your account. First up, let's look at Ganyu. Ganyu is most commonly played as a main DPS that focuses on charge shots in order to deal the majority of her damage. Her specialty charge shots hit 2 times, the first hit dealing standard charge shot damage, while the second part of her Frost-like arrow hits in an AoE and deals significantly more damage. These charge shots are both good for dealing with single target enemies and multiple enemies at the same time, essentially allowing Ganyu to shine no matter what content you bring her to. On top of this, when you do unlock her first passive, every subsequent Frost-like arrow after the first is going to have their crit rate increased by 20% for 5 seconds, making her main source of damage even more reliable and allows you to focus way more on her crit damage substats. Also, because her charge attacks are her main source of damage, this means that she's not reliant on her skill or burst in order to deal a lot of damage, meaning that she's not nearly as energy reliant as a lot of main DPS carries, and as long as you're able to charge up her charge shots, you can keep dealing consistent damage. However, unlike most main DPS carries, Ganyu can also simultaneously function as a sub DPS / support unit. Her elemental skill when used does taunt enemies' attacks to it, while also dealing damage and restoring energy, while her burst puts up a huge cryo field that continuously deals damage with icicles that target enemies within range, allowing her to not only deal continuous damage, but also provide continuous cryo application, making it much easier to trigger elemental reactions, such as freeze and melt. Ganyu's second passive also gives her an additional 20% cryo bonus damage to all allies that are in her burst AoE, meaning that she can simultaneously give herself a 20% damage increase to her cryo damage, as well as to other cryo main damage dealers such as Ayaka, which in my opinion makes her one of the most flexible characters in Genshin Impact. Having the ability to both function as a main DPS or support depending on what you want to build her as, comes with tremendous value. This essentially gives you two different characters in one, and allows you to be very flexible with your team building, meaning you can switch up her build to best suit your playstyle and needs. And speaking of team building, Ganyu has not one but two completely viable meta team comps. Because Ganyu is cryo, you can pair her with hydro units in order to freeze your enemies in place, making it much easier to crowd control and to deal damage to enemies that will normally move out of the way. Freeze teams also give Ganyu access to cryo resonance, as well as the full 4-piece Blizzard Destroyer set, allowing her to get up to 55% crit rate from passes alone so long as her enemy is frozen, allowing you to fully focus on crit damage and maximizing your damage potential. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you can also place Ganyu on a melt comp. By continuously afflicting your enemy with Pyro, Ganyu's able to take advantage of reverse melt and deal huge damage with her charge shots. While you do lose out on a lot of the utility from freeze comps, the damage ceiling is much higher on a melt comp, often allowing you to burst down your enemies much faster. However, melt comps tend to have a much higher technical ceiling, so the majority of players tend to go for freeze comps just because they're more comfortable. However, I've tried and ran both team comps and both are completely viable. It really just depends on what you have and what you find more fun. And lastly, in terms of her major strengths, we obviously can't forget that Ganyu is a ranged DPS. This means that you don't always have to be close to enemies in order to deal damage, allowing you to keep distance between you and your enemies, and allowing you to hit enemies across the field, as well as hit enemies that float in the air that most melee characters can't deal with, or at least not as easily, making Ganyu a pretty safe pick for almost all content. However, despite having all of these strengths, Ganyu still does have her share of weaknesses. First off, she's squishy. Ganyu doesn't really have a high health or defense stat, so if you end up taking damage head on, or without a shield, then Ganyu's very likely to lose a huge chunk of her health or die altogether. Another thing to point out is Ganyu is heavily reliant on actually aiming and shooting, meaning that if you aren't good at landing aim shots, then you're either going to be losing out on a significant amount of damage, or in some cases, losing out on all of your damage if your aim shot misses completely. This means that Ganyu rewards high technical ability, but simultaneously punishes players that aren't good at aiming. You can sometimes get around this by aiming at the ground, so that her AoE bloom will still hit enemies, but if you do this too much, you will be losing out on a lot of damage. And lastly, I want to point out that Ganyu is extremely vulnerable while charging up her charge shots. Obviously, you want to fully charge up your Frostlick arrows in order to deal the most damage you can. However, if an enemy is about to hit you and you dodge, or if an enemy does hit you and interrupts you, then you'll lose your charge flake arrow and have to start charging another one. Meaning that if you're not keeping a good distance between you and your enemy, or if you're not running a shielder on your team, then your damage output is really going to suffer. Overall, I do think that her strengths outweigh her weaknesses, but they're still important to keep in mind. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have Zhongli. While it is technically possible to run him as a main DPS, he is most commonly run as a sub DPS / support unit. And honestly, unless you're going for a non-conventional build, such as a physical Zhongli or a cryo-infused Zhongli with Chongyun and Shenhe, then I highly recommend running him as the geo support he was designed to be. The most valuable aspect of Zhongli's kit is his insanely powerful shield. It has insane type coverage, giving you 150 damage absorption against all elements and physical damage. On top of this, when you unlock his first passive, when Zhongli's shield takes damage, the shield will fortify itself, increasing character's shield strength by 5%, which can stack up to 5 times for a total of an additional 25% shield strength, meaning that at high talent levels, the shield is almost impossible to break. It also has an insanely long uptime of 30 seconds, meaning that if you're not taking insane amounts of damage, then you should be able to have up to 100% uptime, meaning that in terms of shielding, Zhongli is by far your best all-rounder pick. And on top of this, just by being near enemies, so long as you have Zhongli's shield up, you'll reduce enemies' resistance to all elemental and physical damage by 20%, meaning that he's not only able to protect you but also provide you with a little bit of a damage increase. Additionally, with his elemental skill, he's able to summon stone steels that consistently pulsate geo damage that not only hit enemies but also refund energy. And if another geo construct is nearby, it'll cause a resonance between the geo constructs, allowing them to pulsate geo damage as well. And unlike many sub DPS units, Zhongli also has an extremely powerful burst that not only has pretty high raw damage scaling, but also petrifies enemies if it hits, meaning that Zhongli can also be a decent crowd controller if you're not running an Anemo support. By mixing all of these elements together, Zhongli essentially makes it much easier to keep control of your enemies, while also not allowing them to hit you in the first place, making it much easier to ignore enemy attacks altogether, allowing you to not waste time by dodging, and instead allowing you to stand your ground and hit the enemy as much as possible. Also, because Zhongli is so universal, it means that he can slot into just about any team comp. While his absolute best team comps are going to be ones that have at least one other Geo member so that he can activate Geo Resonance, Zhongli can technically be fitted into any team comp so long as you're looking for a shielder, meaning that no matter who you're deciding to main, Zhongli will be there to protect them. I personally think that this gives Zhongli a lot of value, because unlike some support units which are hyper-specific to certain team comps, Zhongli has so much more flexibility, and therefore no matter who you decide to summon for in the future, Zhongli should still be able to fit with them pretty well. However, despite Zhongli being one of the best characters in the game currently, that doesn't mean he doesn't have his drawbacks. Many top tier players state that while Zhongli does make the game easier, in many situations he'll actually be a DPS loss. This isn't because he doesn't hit hard enough, but rather because he can't proc elemental reactions. So in regards to elemental teams, slotting in characters like Kazuha who can boost your damage, while also proccing elemental reactions, will probably net you more damage overall. And something that's being talked about more and more is the fact that there are a lot of enemies being added to the game that directly ignore shields. The most obvious example of this are the Rift Hounds, since they can apply corrosion to your entire team, meaning that in most situations with corrosion you're probably going to want to bring a healer instead. There are also the brand new Bishops in Enkonomia that first drain your energy, but if you run out of energy then they'll drain your health, and unfortunately this drains directly through your shield. And while it's not officially confirmed yet, there are a lot of rumors about new enemies being added that also have shield ignoring mechanics, making many players currently wonder about his long-term viability. I personally believe even with these new additions that Zhongli will still be an extremely useful and viable unit, but it's still important to keep in mind. Okay, but now that we've looked at Ganyu and Zhongli individually, who should you actually pick for your account when it comes down to it? Firstly, I want you to take a look at your account. Where exactly are you struggling the most? For example, do you notice that you're getting hit a lot, or that you're constantly dying? Or are you on the other end of the spectrum where you're not taking much damage because you already have good supports, or you're just very good at dodging, but for some reason you just can't beat that timer in Spiral Abyss because you're just not outputting enough damage? I personally think that this is probably the biggest distinction between whether you should summon for Ganyu or Zhongli. While both Ganyu and Zhongli can technically both be supports, I would say that Ganyu is more of an offensive unit while Zhongli is more of a defensive unit, meaning that if you're struggling on deciding between the two, you should probably figure out what you need more. I also want to put it out there that if you are maining characters like Xiao or Hu Tao specifically, then you probably really want to go with Zhongli. This is because they already damage themselves and often play at low HP, meaning that having a shielder is very valuable for them. And while there technically are other options for them, none of them are quite as solid as Zhongli. To be completely honest, Zhongli fits well with almost any main damage dealer, including Ganyu herself, because not only is his shield valuable for not taking damage, but just as importantly stops you from being interrupted, allowing you to fully focus on damage dealing, so long as you're not dealing with corrosion or shield ignoring mechanics. But if you don't already have a main damage dealer, then Ganyu is an insanely good pick. Having a main damage dealer that can deal consistent damage no matter what, while also having 2 meta team comps, and can also double as a support, is all extremely valuable. And so long as you like her playstyle and don't think that you'll get bored of aiming and shooting, then she's still a top pick even 1 year after her initial release. So what's the final verdict? If you don't already have a main damage dealer, probably go for Ganyu. But if you already have main damage dealers and you're lacking on support, or just want a shield that can tank just about any hit in the game, then Zhongli's probably the better option. While I love both of these characters to death, if I could only recommend one of these two units, it would probably be Zhongli, mainly just because he's so universal, and no one really does what Zhongli does as well as Zhongli can do it. Yes, there are other shielders like Diona, Toma, Noelle, etc., but none of them are quite as good or flexible as Zhongli. And while Ganyu is by far one of the best DPS units in the game, there are other DPS units that do compare to her. So if you already have a solid main DPS, or are interested in one that's coming back in the future, then missing Ganyu isn't the end of the world. However, at the end of the day, I don't really think that you can go wrong with either of these two characters, so when it comes down to it, just pick the character that you think you're going to have the most fun with, because at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. However, if you still want to know more about these characters or are still having doubts about their kits, I did go into way more detail about both of these characters in individual Are They Worth It videos, so I'll make sure to leave a link both up above and down below for you guys if you're interested in that. And if you did end up enjoying the video, please feel free to leave me a like and comment down below. I want to know who you guys are summoning for, whether it's Ganyu or Zhongli, or if you're skipping both of them in favor of a new character down the line. And if you want to see more Genshin Impact videos from me, make sure to hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell. But that's all for now, so until next time, best wishes, bye!